The fantastic and flexible new Westport Library presents Oh Brother, Not Another Podcast with me, Trace Burroughs.
And me, Miggs Burroughs. And our guest today is Mark Yurkiw. And if you've ever had sleepless nights wondering where you're going to get a 1-foot-long Viagra pill or a chariot or a hat made out of a building by Philip Johnson, then we've got the answer for you. It's Mark Yurkiw, who's an amazing artist, scientist, entrepreneur. Is you self-titled? Yeah, is that accurately describing what you do? You do a lot and everything. What did you think you were going to be when you were a little kid? Did you have any thoughts of what you were supposed to be?
As a little kid, I'm not sure I even had the idea of being an artist, but I was always interested in designing things and making things, But my interest in art was as an art collector at the age of 5. I wanted to collect art, but at 5, I don't even get an allowance.
You're going to Sotheby's?
So I figured out that I just had an epiphany. I said, all I have to do is wait for the mailman to show up. The stamps on the mail that came in was my first art collection. Consequently, I became an art collector. But that's a very interesting hobby, because you learn about history, you learn about art, you learn about the world and all the things that people think are important in it. So that was a fun thing for me to do as a kid. But then as a kid, I started designing stuff. I grew up in New York City, so I watched the street cleaners go by. So I started engineering a different street cleaning machine. But I was, as a kid, I was like, it was kind of like a Rube Goldberg thing, But then as I got older, I was just gravitated to, as soon as I could get on the subway by myself, I'd be going to museums and checking things out. And when I was 14, I actually had my first apartment. And I completely covered it in murals that were essentially copies of things I saw at the Museum of Modern Art. And kind of elaboration on that kind of as well. But it was kind of hippie days in those days. I was using fluorescent paints and stuff, lighting with black light and that sort of stuff. But it was a lot of fun. But when I went to school, my interests leaned into science. I just liked the idea of science on its basis level is cause and effect. You learn about the world, the universe, and everything in it by just trying to understand what's going on. So that became more than a fascination. It became a discipline and a study for me, right through high school and into college. But when I got through to the point where I was working for the chairman of the department in physics in college, doing research in something called nuclear quadrupolar momentum theory. Say that real fast.
Oh, that. Yeah.
3 times real fast.
I aced that course.
And what that was the study of the taking organic compounds and doing free induction decays, which is reading them on an oscilloscope as we electrify them with a coil, to try to understand how these molecules worked. And then that was sort of the predecessor to what ultimately was the research necessary to create MRI machines. But this was just basic science that ended up being sort of utilized in that world. But I realized that I could be spending years just writing papers to other scientists saying, don't go down this path because it didn't get me where I was going. and as a naive kid, that had a big impact on me. I just didn't really want to. I wanted to do something that I had a direct impact on the world somehow. Okay, and while I was in college, I ended up switching majors in graduate school to fine art sculpture. But that was a disappointment, because I went from a highly disciplined subject like physics and chemistry and biology to a bunch of, at the time, hippies throwing paint at each other when they were stoned. And I don't mean to degrade it, but that's how it felt. It was just, I just wanted to kind of characterize that I went from this very strict discipline to this kind of like free-for-all for it. You could do anything you wanted. And I didn't find that educational. There was some very interesting professors that understood what my problem was and were directing me in a good direction. But then I got another problem is that I had a girlfriend who was working for an art dealer. This is sort of a lot of art dealers are like private art dealers, and they just invite people to their homes for coffee or dessert or dinners and display all this art, and they try to sell it. And I was very disappointed to find out that this woman was trying to tell me how she does it, and that it was all a business. What she would do is she had an inn to these buildings. People own these buildings on Fifth Avenue, and she'd hang them in the hallways in the hope that these people would start to recognize the artists and want to buy them. She showed me the path of how that worked for her, and it was pretty successful. I won't go into the details or her name at this point, but it was all of a sudden it became the same problem I had in the science. I was too idealistic. I was naive in that, you had to make a business of the art, and that's why most artists aren't businessmen. They just are art, and they need someone to go out and be businessmen for them to sell their art. I said, but the business of selling art just kind of disappointed me. So I said, if I'm going to do this for a living, I'm going to start with the right premise. I'm going to make a business out of art. So what I ended up mentoring with this one man, Joe Randall, who's since passed away, who was creating all of these what I thought of as storytelling sculpture. And he was commissioned to create these situations, these effects, these props, these things that told a story for, in this case, some clients trying to advertise something. I found the problem solving and the learning of how to then take something I didn't know anything about and drill down to putting it into a piece of art form that was recognizable and told the story. I thought that was very interesting. So I quit graduate school and worked for this man part-time while I was in graduate school, and then a year later started my own business in Manhattan. And I was shocked at how quickly it caught on. I was, before I knew it, to make a long story short, I was interviewing people from all over the world that wanted to work for me. And I had a staff of about, at one point, a dozen artists from all the reaches of the planet that had, in my mind, specializations in different things that I could then orchestrate, kind of like a conductor, into solving these problems and executing them. Well, my thinking was that I was doing my clients a service, because what we were doing is we were doing more than any one artist could do. We had all these interdisciplinary ways of solving the problems and putting them in front of you. Consequently, that ended up having to become also a special effects studio. So we were then doing film. Well, the film that comes to the East Coast anyway. And it just kind of blossomed, and before I knew it, 25 years went by. And I had a grand time. But my philosophy about the business was I was trying to bring the best artists I could and give them a way to earn a living while they created their art. So that was the fun I was having with my business. I tried to give them the best life I could, and that was the point of the business to me, and was happy to, make sure that they could have a nice life and still do their art. So that was the rationale I had for not focusing on creating art of my own brand, but using all of my science skills, which essentially is problem solving, and all of my art skills to create these sculptural effects that told a story. So it felt like I created my own brand of art. Mm-hmm. And I didn't fall into the trap of being an artist that was subject to the whims of fad,
Exhibitions and things.
the whims of an art dealer, that kind of thing, because I saw that happen over and over and over again. When the art dealer started telling me, I like this, I like that, but don't do any more of those, I said, I was a kid. Nah, that's not cool. That's not for me to do, So that's 25 years in a nutshell.
Yeah. I just want to say your stuff is so diverse and cool looking, and I think some of the listeners should get a look at some of the stuff that you've done because it is very unique. So I found this nice article on you at inkct.com, and there's a little search function at the top, put in Mark Yurkiw, YURKIW, and you'll see some of the stuff that you've done.
Yeah, so I'm just run down quickly because, you've done props for movies and magazines, right? Editorial. So
I've covered every base there is where you can deliver a piece of art in any media, in any form, in any way, whether it be ethereal to concrete little props that said something.
And this is all before the advent of 3D printing. You did. I don't. Well, maybe I do know why I'm fascinated by the Viagra pill. But why don't they do a close-up of a real Viagra pill? Why did you need I forget how big it is, a foot long?
Well, that was, had to be 25, 30 years ago. Back then, you didn't have the digital abilities that you have now, where you could probably just illustrate in a 3D program with flawlessly a pill. Back then it was, photographers shooting large format, and they wanted this thing to be perfect, and they wanted to have the ability to light it with exterior lights to give it shape and form and whatnot. So something as simple as this pill became a project for the photographer, because they were trying to achieve something. They were trying to turn what would be otherwise a very kind of boring thing into something they felt that they created as a piece of photography that was shaded and modeled the way they wanted. So, and that the shadows would fall into the words if they were embossed in something or whatever. But those were, frankly, to me, boring props, but interesting ways of solving problems.
Right, challenges. So there's so many, from celebrities to corporations that you've worked for. I'm just picking one out that fascinates me, like Eddie Murphy. What did you do that involved?
Oh, well, I'm trying to remember what studio that was for. But Eddie Murphy was making a new movie, and it was about... I learned later. I didn't even realize it then. It was about advertising, or was it the setting was an advertising agency. But what I was asked to do is that they came up with this one shot where the singer, my goodness, her name just went out of my head. She was going to come crashing down into the World Financial Center in a crate, and the crate splits open, and out of that she comes riding this chariot made out of Grace Jones. Thank you. She comes riding out of this box with 6 muscle-bound guys that she's whipping, and they're running around the atrium in the World Financial Center. Of course, this is all before September 11th happened. And that was kind of fun to do, because all of a sudden, the qualities that I enjoyed about doing stuff like that was we had to engineer what a chariot would feel like and how it would work. We had to do the historical research as to what a Roman chariot might look like and how it might work and the proportions and whatnot. But then we had the fun of then essentially creating it all out of African animal bones.
Jeez.
Except for the wheels, of course, and then adding all these sort of brutalistic elements, this sort of, things like exhaust pipes on it and stuff like that. So, but it was a blend of creating this kind of fantasy, and it all starts with her crashing into and out of this box onto the floor of the World Financial Center. And that was fun to do. It was, it solved a lot of problems and created an interesting prop. The hilarious part is that mostly I would keep all my props, except Paramount Pictures, that's what it was, insisted that they had contracted me to own that, to put it in their studios. And I said, it was too big for me to store easily anyway, so I figured the hell with it.
Well, so people can, probably something everybody's seen is the Statue of Liberty coat drive, which your shop created, and, is that huddled Statue of Liberty, just from a pedestrian's point of view, question, was that a model? I mean, was there a person in there? Was it a costume? Was it a model? Was it a...
Well, it was everything, and again, it's about solving the problems, because it needed to be a poster, which means that there was a still photographer that had to shoot a still picture of this thing. So we had it was a full sculpture, but the sculpture was actually dressed in a real material, and essentially that's the body was a rubber dummy inside, and then we just created a headdress for it, and then sculpted the fabric onto that. Of course, some of it's hard, some of it's soft, but so that it could stay together. But then it also needed to be shot for a TV commercial. Yeah. So in that one, they wanted to put a mime inside to give the Statue of Liberty, who was supposed to be out on the curb freezing. They were drifting fake snow around her. So the mime inside had to shudder. So it was a man, actually, who fit into this costume, essentially. So that was how it solved both problems at once. And, these things, I wanted to, I think I talked to you about it once before, which is why you bring it up. None of these things are solely created by one person. Everything from the ideas onto the execution required teams of people to execute. And I was very happy to be working with teams of people. It added to the creative process. Everybody had something and a reason to want to shape-shift it or be party to what made it special. And so all of these projects were just so much fun to have all these collaborations. I mean, even my team of artists, which most of the time felt like herding cats, that half of them didn't even speak English half the time. It was convincing them, because most artists think of themselves as, soul free people that only do what they do, and the world is supposed to understand them through their art. And my attitude was completely different. My attitude was more heads together can do things that no one person can do, can send this to a place that art can take on a whole nother proportion. So to me, that was the important part of getting all these people, and we'd have these morning meetings to discuss every job, and who was going to lead that project, why, what their skill sets were, what other skill sets were needed to create this thing. And that, to me, became an integral part of what made the work so fascinating. I would get all this input from all these artists to every little thing we were doing, and there'd be discussions and arguments and whatnot, and then my job was to herd them all together and say, look guys, here's each one of you has identified what your role is here and what your contribution is. Now let's do something together that none of us one individually could do. So that was my fun with it at all times.
What's that?
Was that your phone?
It's like a cornucopia of sounds.
Technology. Well, speaking of, because you're somewhat, well, you don't call yourself that, but I think of a futurist, because you kind of compile tons of information and trends, and you sort of have a sense of where things are going. And any notions of where we're going, where technology's going, where the human race will...
Well, it boils
interface with technology like years from now?
Yeah, well, let's use technology as a tool and discuss it from that perspective. And let's backtrack a little bit, because I want to give you a fundamental position on this. I sincerely believe that all of this digital world that we're in, all this computerization, These are tools. And what are they tools for? They are tools for people's imagination. It gives them limitless ability to imagine their own futures and create things using all of these digital tools and interact with the entire rest of the world, even simultaneously. To me, this is every technological feat in my mind, but even pre-digital, was giving humanity something to work with. So even backtracking that one step back, what are we all here doing? We're all here imagining our own futures. And every time someone comes up with what seems like a new idea, and by the way, my mentor that I spent a year with said there was nothing new under the sun. But given that, each one of us wakes up every day and we imagine something. Even if it's just what our lunch is going to be, okay? If you use that as a tool, every time somebody puts forth a new idea out there, it intrigues the rest of humanity. And there are people that will follow that and create the solutions, even if they don't exist yet, to move things forward. And this is the tool here that in our lifetimes has the most impact on that. All of a sudden, anybody and the entire world can come up with an idea, put it on the internet, and hundreds, thousands of people can source the problems around creating whatever they imagined, and all of a sudden come up with solutions. Now you apply that to anything. Apply that to medicine. What do they call it? Crowdsourcing. This is just mind-boggling. The how this, in my mind, brings humanity together. It's an opportunity that we've never had before. This digital world is a way of, well, as one of my favorite ideas that another scientist had proposed is that your brain is nothing but a few billion cells that talk to one another. Now, he compared it to what this digital world is bringing to us. Imagine that all of your cell phones are connected. All of a sudden, like the cells in a brain, that are synapses that have electrical connections that think through things. You can imagine now broadcasting that on the planet, and everybody is getting that and thinking about it.
But the utopian view of the internet before it came full bloom was that this was going to bring the world together, and it seems to have just allowed every nut job on the planet to have a voice that maybe they always had, but only with their uncle at Thanksgiving. And now,
okay, everything can be used for good and bad.
Yeah.
All right, that's number one. Number two is that all of these things can take on a life of their own. And we have our dark side and we have our light side. Okay, and there's going to be fits and starts to all technologies. Think of the first car. Okay, now that clunker, would work when it wanted to, would stop when it didn't work anymore, and we slowly refined that to a machine now. I mean, frankly, my car is 2 years away from having historical plates. Why? Because it won't die.
Yeah.
But a Model T, which probably you could keep running, certainly evolved into something that's much more reliable, much more efficient, could take us farther, more comfortably, etc. So just like the internet, this all started in our lifetimes. And it's this, every kind of person for every kind of reason has been using it and testing the waters with it. So these bad and good things will all occur. But over time, this will refine itself. And those people that want to use it for good things will use it for good things. Those people who want to use it for bad things will use it for bad things. And to some degree, as societies and cultures and humanity starts to use this tool, we'll start to filter this out better and do a better job of making sure that things don't go horribly wrong. Okay? But they will always be at the cusp of going wrong. I mean, look at gene technology. All of a sudden we have this ability, but all of a sudden this guy, this one doctor in China's now manipulated genes on these, I think, twins, was it? And everyone's horrified. Terrible things are going to happen. And in one respect, they're all right. In another respect, this is the process. This is the making the sausage part of the future. So the only thing we really have to worry about is what everyone always does is we don't annihilate ourselves before we get there.
Yeah, good luck with
something before the next cool thing happens.
Carl Sagan and a number of other scientists, I use Carl Sagan only because I was back in the 70s, and right through Hawkins, who passed away recently, all said the same thing. The only way humanity is going to survive is to continue beyond our expectations here on this planet. We are bound to travel to space.
By the way, you can't for $35 million. You can go to the space station. Did you read about that? And would you go if you had the money in your back pocket? Would you do it?
Well, by the way, $35,000 a night. That was the hotel room out in space
for a month.
for a night.
Well, they I think they amortize that. You have to be up there for a month. So the cost would be
I see.
Amortized to $35,000.
I didn't read the details.
Yeah.
But I was very excited about that because I made a bet when I was a 16-year-old that I would one day be able to go into space as an individual. And that was back in the early 70s when I was 16 or so, something like that. And it's come to pass.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I can buy a ticket to go spend a month, if you will, on the space station. Now, like everything else, it's expensive because it's the first out. It's the expensive part of the first people who get there. But then what'll happen is if there's interest, that price will drop. And we're going to see 2001: A Space Odyssey in real life. Hopefully in my lifetime, because I would love to be up there.
You would go.
You would,
okay.
yeah.
But I'll tell you why. Ever since we saw that first photograph of the big blue marble, when the astronauts first took a picture of our planet, that to me was an epiphany. That to me, everyone should experience and understand that fundamentally, because all we are is a tiny little marble floating in a vast blackness.
I know.
I thought, if nothing else, that would bring the globe together. We'd all be humbled by it and say, you know what, we're all brothers and sisters on this planet, but
that won't happen until we see aliens.
Then people were
radicalized. That's right. That's when everyone will come together.
Right.
The alien thing. I don't know, this is a little off topic, but deep face is this technology is real scary, where they can take anybody and make them more talk and the mannerisms, the voice and everything.
To morph their
and
animation.
I saw a thing on Obama where he just says stuff and was a little rough, but they can perfect it. Now, what happens if some jerk sends something to like North Korea and says, we're going to bomb you, and it's got whoever's president
Trump talking or whatever.
It's this,
and then they react to it without.
It's the same issue that we just discussed.
I know.
You can use these things for good or bad, and these are just tools.
Yeah, some jerks could
go really bad. Well, we've got a minute and a half to go. Right. So any parting? Now, you said, I don't know if you want to talk about something else, but you once told me, that cars are going to be obsolete. No one's going to own. There's no point in owning a car.
Why a car? Going to be obsolete.
There's no point in.
Absolutely. I mean, why is Uber and Lyft's valuation so high? They're simply waiting till they don't need the drivers, because that's when they become valuable, because then they're buying up all the cars that the manufacturers are making to allow us on our phones in our hands to then call up whatever we need. If you need to take 6 people to the movies, all of a sudden a car with 6 people on time will show up at your door to take these 6 people to the movies. When you're done with the movies, driverless
no
car.
insurance, nothing.
You will shed all of the need to own a car anymore. It's just not going to be practical anymore.
Well, that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
More importantly, though, what I want to say before this ends is that what are we all here for? To imagine. That's what humanity does. We're here to imagine our futures. All of our educations, all of our insights are about leading the way to all of our future. And I can't emphasize that point enough, because Just like John Lennon said, imagine all the people living day to day.
Yeah, I agree with all that.
And that's what's important.
I think the sad thing, there's a lot of people's imagination just goes as far as the next episode of the Kardashians.
Yeah, okay. On that high note.
Sorry for being so negative.
No, thank you, Mark Yurkiw. We're done. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you.